And now it's my pleasure to turn the floor over to Greg Stevens.
Thank you very much, Adam, and thank you all for joining us for today's program on building core alignment and empowering others. As Adam mentioned, my name is Greg Stevens. I'm the Assistant Director for Professional Development here at the American Alliance of Museums, and it's my pleasure to be hosting this program, which is part 2 of a 4-part series based on the AAM publication, Magnetic, the Art and Science of Engagement, written by Anne Bergeron and Beth Tuttle, who will be our key moderators today. I'll introduce Anne and Beth in just a moment and turn the stage over to them. But I do want to let you all know that we are joined today by some very fine colleagues and museum directors from a range of institutions who are featured in that publication and who will be here with us today to share their personal experience in building core alignment and empowering others at their institutions. So Ellen, Jane, Dennis, Bill, Rand, and Glenn, thank you all for being here with us today, and we'll introduce you more formally in just a moment. I do want to let you all know that today's program is sponsored by the Getty Foundation and, of course, produced by our fine colleagues at Learning Time. So thank you, Adam, and your team for being here for today's program and making sure everything runs smoothly. And this program is brought to you in collaboration with the Leadership and Management Network, a professional network of the American Alliance of Museums. LMN is one of 22 of AAM's professional networks, and as the name suggests, the focus of this particular affinity group is to offer professional development opportunities and build a community of practice with colleagues who work in leadership or management positions in museums, or really anyone who is interested in museum management and leadership issues. We are really thrilled to have the Leadership and Management Network as part of this Magnetic program series. And on behalf of that network, I know that they are very interested in having you be a part of them, either serving on the board of LMN, perhaps hosting a face-to-face workshop, or convening at your institution, or simply just joining the professional network if you are not already a member. As I mentioned, this is part 2 of a 4-part series. If you are interested in participating in the previous program, that program recording will be available by the end of the month. And we also have 2 more programs coming up this fall and later on in December. Of course, today's program is all about Magnetic, the Art and Science of Engagement, and this particular program is about creating a compelling vision and looking at that from a people first and service first perspective. And we'll be focusing on collaboration and partnership and how to do so with staff, board, and community. Our goals for this program are to help you, our audience, be better able to define and communicate shared vision in your institutions, to create internal and external alignment, to create a no-fear culture of empowerment, and I know Anne and Beth, you'll be talking about that in just a moment, and also talk about the principles of servant leadership and what that actually means. Before we get started with the formal program, we all got together and decided there were some essential questions that we wanted to address and to ask you in our audience. Why does your institution truly matter to your visitors and your community? You may have thought about that, but here's an opportunity. If you feel like sharing anything in the chat box in the lower left, please do so. Also, for you to consider, what are the necessary conditions for aligning and empowering others? What needs to happen to make that happen? And finally, how do you lead so that others can follow? These are going to be the questions that we try to address in the next 90 minutes or so. And with that said, I'm going to turn the stage over to my colleagues, Anne Bergeron and Beth Tuttle, to give us a quick overview about the 6 practices of magnetic museums.
Hi, everyone. This is Beth Tuttle. I'm the president and CEO of the Cultural Data Project, and I'm going to lead off. And thanks for being here with us today. The 6 practices, just in quick overview, are we start with building core alignment. This is going to be the focus of today's conversation. This is where every one of the museums that we studied, their journey started with this creation of a very compelling and relevant vision that was powerful enough to capture both the hearts and the minds of critical internal and external stakeholders. The second practice is embracing 360 engagement. And what that refers to is the fact that inside magnetic museums, there's a very holistic approach to engagement. They place a high priority on educating and engaging their audiences, and they also invest very, very deeply in developing and engaging their staff, their trustees, their donors, and their communities through meaningful experiences. The third of these is empowering others, and this is the second of the 6 practices that we're going to focus on today. The museums in this study exemplified the concept of shared leadership. And it challenges a lot of what we've heard about the notion that a singular charismatic leader is the critical success factor for institutions. What we're looking at and what we're going to spend a lot of time talking about today is a new model of leadership for magnetic organizations where the leader facilitates much more so than directs, and where the leader empowers rather than dictating. The fourth practice, widening the circle and inviting the outside in. These institutions embrace a communitarian spirit that's really open and inclusive and generous. They are very permeable in the way they work and the way they engage people with the development of what they do and how they behave with their community. The fifth is becoming essential. And this is really where museums are making the transition from nice to necessary, where they've really focused on linking their cultural mission with their civic missions and committed themselves to meeting very genuine community needs. And the sixth of these practices, and it looks like we lost our number there, is building trust through high performance. So when all is said and done, magnetic museums are high-performance organizations that build trust by consistently meeting or exceeding expectations. And part of that high performance comes through these notions that we're going to spend time talking about today that have to do with the ways in which they build alignment and empower those who help conduct the work of the museum. Just to refresh everybody's memory, the definition of magnetic museums, they're high-performance organizations that deliver tangible cultural and civic value. They're able to achieve superior business results through their commitment to service, engagement, and empowerment of others. And this last point is the one that we're really going to focus on today. They're distinguished by this very powerful alignment around the compelling vision and the way they use that to create lasting bonds through meaningful experiences. Alignment's really the key scientific principle behind magnetism. When all the atoms in a piece of iron fall into place with their north and south poles pointing in the same direction, they begin to cooperate, and that's how a magnet is formed and how magnetism starts. Well, we found that same principle holds true for magnetic museums. And in those institutions, it's a compelling vision that becomes the lodestone around which everything is aligned. This is an image that comes to us from Simon Sinek. He's an ethnographer, a teacher, and an author who studied the communication patterns of great leaders. And what he found is that the most successful leaders are those who are able to inspire people with a sense of compelling vision. As you can see here, he calls this the golden circle, and he says it's the why at the center of the golden circle. So in the center we see the why, which is really the part of the messaging that is about the motivation. How is what we do, how is the process by which we do our work, and what is what we actually deliver. So in his book, Start With Why, Sinek writes, those who truly lead are able to create a following of people who act because they are inspired. They act, he says, not because they have to, but because they want to. And that's exactly what we saw inside the magnetic museums we studied. His study, Sinek's studies, found that while most people start by telling what they hope to do and then talking about how they plan to do it, inspiring leaders that he studied began by sharing the personally motivating why behind the doing. And he reminds us over and over again that people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. So in our study, what we found is that the leaders of magnetic museums got right to the heart of why their museums mattered and why they, as leaders, were personally motivated to do the work they do. And their staffs were equally able to talk about the why behind what they do. So rather than articulating their vision as collect, preserve, and present, or educate, entertain, and inspire, a museum, I don't know, I'll use the Children's Museum as an example, it's clear that its vision is to make a difference in the lives of children and families and to develop their capacity for learning and creative thinking. So for this reason, the Children's Museum of Pittsburgh has become a true partner and a resource for all kinds of people who work with or on behalf of children. So we want to pose two questions here to you now for you to think about as we go through this process. The first is, why does your museum matter? And the second is, what job is it that your visitor or community needs you to do?
And while we're, as you go along, if we could just invite folks to type into the chat box in the lower left anything that comes to your mind about your particular institution and why it matters. And I'm wondering if, Ellen, you might help clarify for us the second question.
Yep.
What job does your visitor or community need you to do, and what that actually means?
Thanks. I was just going to type in the resource. That comes from Clay Christensen, who is a Harvard business professor, who has written about milkshake marketing. And the reason it's called milkshake marketing is because they studied what job milkshakes did for people who were buying them, and then changed the milkshake based on how they better could do the job, which turned out to be keeping people occupied and full in their job, in their travel to work. So milkshake marketing involves addressing the basic problem a customer is facing. So for a museum, it may be having a quality family time somewhere, or what to do with the kids on a Saturday afternoon. It provides a product that can deliver the necessary result, and it considers the functional, emotional, and social dimensions of the job that needs to be done. So I'm going to type in the link so everybody can read this.
Thanks,
Great.
Ellen.
Thank you, Ellen.
So if others will just continue to, I see a couple of jobs coming up, if others will continue to just pipe up here over in the chat section, that would be great, because then we can all see how you all might answer this question and how you think about the job that your museum is there to do. So we're now going to dive into the two particular practices of magnetic museums that we're going to focus on today. And the first of these is building core alignment. And as I said before, organizations or elements become magnetic when there is full alignment. And so in these organizations that we studied, people, values, and culture, operations, strategy, and program were all aligned to achieve a very specific vision. And when that happens, it begins to create a kind of attractive force field that enables these organizations to attract and retain four very critical kinds of capital that you see here: core capital, brand capital, social capital, and financial capital. And I want to define those for you. So core capital is really the human and intellectual capital, as well as the collections and facilities and the core elements that make up what the museum has to offer. Brand capital is the goodwill, the trust, the reputation, and the public value that the institution builds. Social capital are the relationships and networks that are created among internal and external communities. This term comes from Robert Putnam, who's the author of Bowling Alone, who talks about two different kinds of social capital. There's a bonding capital, which is where people who are part of the same kind of organization or institution connect to one another. And bridging capital is when those people begin to reach out and bring others into that network. And we see this over and over again, the building of this kind of social capital within the magnetic museums. And finally, there's the financial capital. And people often tend to think that financial capital is what's required to drive the others. But what we really found is that the financial capital really followed some of the others. So it's a result of building the core, the brand, and the social capital. If others can't understand, own, and literally see the vision, then it's very difficult for them to share it. And if they don't share it, there's really no chance of alignment. So in AAMS and my work with museums, we often hear people talking about the fact, particularly leaders of institutions, you know, I've told them my vision dozens of times, but everybody keeps asking where we're going. Or they say, you know, I feel like I say this over and over again. Well, you know, this is one of the hardest jobs that I think any leader has to do, and that is to begin to first understand what his or her own personal vision is, and then to understand what that vision is that's shared by that core group of people. Peter Senge, who wrote The Fifth Discipline, says, when there's a genuine vision, people excel and learn, not because they're told to, but because they want to. Now you'll hear an echo there to what Simon Sinek said, which was about people are not compelled to do something because they want to do it. And this brings us back to this whole notion of motivation and what it is that gets people moving and making them want to achieve the vision. So how do these museums create this sense of shared vision? Well, they do it by making vision visible. And they do that in a number of ways. First, you know, they may have, you know, as this image illustrates, vision may emerge from an individual or a small group. John Cotter, who wrote Leading Change, calls this group the guiding coalition. Well, that core team identifies and articulates the vision and then begins to inspire and enlist others in sharing it. And as the internal stakeholders are invited to contribute to it, to adapt it, and to express the vision in their own terms, that's the point at which they begin to take responsibility for it and to develop a sense of ownership over it. And finally, as the vision takes root, all the stakeholders start to see it at work. At this point, the shared vision becomes visible. It's extremely important to celebrate successes early in the process and to acknowledge the efforts that are being made in order to encourage this kind of continued momentum. The other thing that we learned in this process was that it's the importance of what we called memorable mantras in order to communicate the vision. These are typically really straightforward and simple expressions of the essence of the vision. So you see here just a couple of examples. They really help translate the vision into action. And what we've learned from the study and from a lot of the reading is it's important to use very simple and concrete language and to repeat it, repeat it, repeat it. And Dennis, I don't know if you're on the phone with us. Are you there? No. Dennis Wentz, who is the president of the Franklin Institute, his advice was this. He said, if you want to achieve alignment, you say it again, again, and again. But then he added, and you say it consistently each and every time. Every time you change the way you say it, it confuses people. So we learned that over and over again, whether it was play with real stuff as sort of the guiding phrase for the Children's Museum of Pittsburgh, or no margin, no mission at the Franklin Institute, whether we were talking to people inside or outside the museum, they could all say those same guiding phrases. So I'm going to turn it over now for Anne to talk us through a little bit about empowering others, and then we're going to open up the conversation.
Great. Thank you, Beth. So now we're going to talk about what's actually the third practice of magnetism, that of empowering others. So let's start with the definition of empowerment as it relates to magnetic organization. As you can see here, empowerment is the act of sharing information, power, responsibility, accountability, and ownership with others so that they can take initiative, make informed choices, and act to achieve desired outcomes. So if we unpack this definition a bit, we see that what we're really talking about is distributed leadership, when the future of an organization is decided not by the few, but by the many. So how do magnetic museums create this sense of collective empowerment? Well, they do so, there's the Philbrick's lovely new auxiliary satellite space downtown. They do so by prioritizing people and service. Servant leadership is a concept that was introduced by Robert Greenleaf in 1970. It was inspired by his reading of Hermann Hesse. He writes, "Becoming a servant leader begins with the natural feeling that one wants to serve first. Then conscious choice brings one to aspire to lead. This manifests itself in the care taken by the servant leader to make sure that other people's highest priority needs are being served." These leaders that Greenleaf is referencing are committed, oops, what's going on? Sorry, here we are. These leaders that Greenleaf is referencing are committed to developing others and helping them to grow, which ultimately results in high-performance, mission-oriented museums. But that's for a later webinar, so stay tuned in September. When we talk about people associated with a museum, we mean the full breadth of its community. Staff, trustees, volunteers, donors, visitors, the full range of stakeholders. Magnetic museums empower their communities to take an active role in shaping their institutions and their experiences with them. And in terms of empowerment, two critically important groups, of course, are the staff and the board. Something wonderful happens when leadership is distributed throughout an organization. When staff are given the freedom to explore ideas that are consistent with the vision and empowered to undertake initiatives from concept to implementation, they become invested in the museum's success. This is how you build bench strength. Organizations that show this kind of respect and trust in staff are also able to retain that very staff over the long term. And that's because they're given the opportunity to innovate, problem solve, learn while doing, and ultimately achieve big things and be recognized for their accomplishments. In other words, staff play an active role in an organization's success. They are not passive bystanders. And you know, it's no different with your board. It's essential to engage them early in your vision shaping process to seek their insights, advice, and endorsement. This is actually their governance role, to help your organization set goals and strategic direction, and then to be accountable for that. This is different from management, which is the allocation of resources and the oversight of operations to achieve desired goals. Management, as we all know, is a staff function. Although, let's be honest, sometimes our board members get confused. Giving your trustees the information and tools they need to be effective advocates for your museum will enable them to act in ways that support the institutional vision. It will also allow them to make contributions that are personally meaningful to them and to your organization. And we don't just mean financial contributions. It's important to view your trustees as partners and community representatives. So the last thing that we wanted to touch on before we hear from our guests is the notion of embracing risk. Magnetic museums create a no-fear culture by rewarding experimentation and allowing for failure without repercussion. You can't innovate without assuming some risk. So we return to the earlier definition of empowerment. This means sharing authority and decision-making and freeing your people from playing it safe to being creative and courageous, pushing the boundaries to realize the vision. This is what Peter Senge calls a learning organization, one that is people-centered and people-empowered. This ties right back to what Beth discussed earlier about shared vision as opportunities for learning as people become engaged in creating their future. Embedded in a no-fear culture is the concept of managed risk, also known in the business world as failing at a low cost. By prototyping, you can see if a larger investment might pay off. So now I'm going to turn this back over to Greg to pose a question to all of you.
Great, thanks very much. And this is really a question for our audience and our special guests in terms of thinking about your organization and risk tolerance or risk aversion. You know, where does your institution fall on that spectrum? Very tolerant, somewhat tolerant, not at all tolerant to risk. And when we were thinking about this program, we all had a conversation about what that really means, what risk means, and I think one of our special guests talked about, well, risk at what scale, what ceiling of risk. I'm wondering if we might talk about that for just a moment.
Well, we talked, this is Beth speaking, we talked a bit about, as you said, the scale of risk, and this really has to, in a world where we're trying to empower people to act, what we can't do is we can't send them out, to fail. We have to support them appropriately through the process of risk taking. And so we talked about, when you've got a very clear vision and a very clear destination in mind, there are many ways that one might take to get to that same destination. And there are certain risks that are of a scale that you can take to experiment and try something and step back from it, and it's not going to take you completely off your path. And I wondered if any of the directors could give us an example of a kind of experiment like that you took that you thought worked out particularly well, and maybe one of you should share one that maybe didn't work out so well.
This is Bill. I'll chime in if I could. We early on in this process, on the sort of building shared vision piece, staff very, very quickly came to a notion that the reason our museum, the Christ Museum, exists is because we wanted to change lives. We literally wanted the world to look different to people once they'd been inside our building. And we went with this notion of changing lives to our trustees, and expected that with our passion and our remarkable articulate presentation, that they would be right on board. And actually the opposite happened. They ran screaming from the room. And the reasons that they gave were, well, if you're going to change people's lives, how are you going to demonstrate that? How are you going to prove it? How are you going to become accountable for this great claim you're making? We came back and we said, well, gosh, it's not going to be every person every day. This is aspirational. It's not, a contract we're making. And it took us a very, very long time to get the trustees to the point of accepting the words engage and transform. We could never quite get them to that word change lives as part of the mission.
Anybody else got an example of perhaps a sense of how risk or allowing a staff person to take a risk might have changed the trajectory of that person's work or career or contribution inside your own organization?
This is Ellen. I'm happy to take a leap. I think I know the core belief at Conner Prairie, put guests at the center, is really not just about, it's about understanding that learning occurs when people are engaged and excited, and that that's easiest to do when you start from what they seem to be naturally interested in. So we've allowed people to take lots of be empowered as long as that key concept is at the center. So the people who are who run a very traditional living history portion a couple of years ago decided that they could make the experience much more engaging, particularly for children, if they took off from video game concepts and allowed the kids to have avatars and be characters in this living history museum, and to fulfill roles and to move up to levels. It was very video game inspired by some of our younger staff people. And that, I frankly had nothing to do with it. It just was a terrific brainstorm about how you put into action the core concept of what we're trying to do, and that's been incredibly successful. I just got an email today from a family that wanted to tell us how successful that was with their children. So I think we've really learned from bringing video games in a different capacity to a living history section that doesn't sound normal at first glance.
Hello, this is Glenn. I'm looking at the word tolerant, and I'm sure, I don't think that's the right word. I think we shouldn't be tolerant of risk. We should be embracing it. And I can give an example right as we speak right now. There's a huge presentation in our community that I was expected to do and was supposed to do, but because I wanted to be here today with all of you, I have several staff members doing this presentation. They've never done it before. It's new to them. They're going to talk about our mission, our values, all the big hitters and the core issues of our institution. And I love it. I embrace it. I'm excited for them to be out there in the community and have their faces and their ideas being shared as opposed to mine. And so I think it's part of the culture. I don't think we should tolerate it. I think we should embrace it, expect it. There's nothing better than a staff member coming back after they've taken a risk or completed something that was risky, and the look in their eyes, the smile on their face, and the empowerment they have.
Yeah.
And Glenn, it might be you, Glenn, or perhaps Bill, talking about risk is not necessarily the color of paint you choose for the exhibition wall, but risk might be the $2 million software package you're considering.
Right, certainly different levels of risk, and or certain levels of consequence if the risk doesn't pan out.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And Bill,
I was going to say it's seldom as bad as you think it's going to be when you take a gamble and it does work. So.
Right. Bill, I wanted to ask. Oh, go ahead, Rand. Go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, I was just going to very quickly add this wonderful quotation by a guy named Ernst Holzel, who is, I think he's currently the Senior Vice President of Operations at Google. And he was one of Google's first 10 employees, and he had this great saying about, fail, but fail early. Mm-hmm. And I do think that there's a balance there. And, you want to encourage risk-taking. You want people to be bold, make independent decisions, and move in the right direction. But you also want to encourage people to fail as early in the process as possible. And I think that kind of goes back to your prototyping comment. We should always be prototyping in a sense. So I just put that out there because it's been a fun quotation for me in working with my staff in terms of kind of guiding how we manage risk.
Well, and I would say that we are in my own organization. This is Beth talking. We're about to undertake a very significant technology project underway, and we've learned so much from working with with high-level technology developers who said, you have to move into a model that is so much more agile, where you are really practicing extremely rapid feedback loops so that you can adapt and be responsive and be able to know if something's not working before you overinvest in it. And the reason, this is not a conversation, today's conversation is not necessarily about risk, but risk is so much a portion of, it's so much a part of the building of empowerment, because what's at the heart of all of this conversation about alignment and empowerment is the fact that what you're doing is you're building a sense of confidence and trust inside your organization. And that is frankly what is the thing that gives people the solid ground on which to act. And I think that notion of trust is so important. And I was going to call out a quote from one of Bill's staff members at the Chrysler, who talked about the fact, and this has happened to the person who was part of the original gallery host team, and she said, we are empowered, the organization entrusts us to make good decisions. And the reason we feel confident to make good decisions is that we know that the management of the organization is going to back us up no matter what decision we make. And that's where that trust factor comes in, that gives people the confidence to step forward boldly and take action.
But I also think I would just jump in really quickly and add that is the key to this notion of embracing risk, that it really does have to come from the top. And this is where the leadership of the institution has a really important role to play, so that the first time that there is that early failure and there is the demonstration that there is no repercussion except to understand the lesson learned from the failure, that will reinforce how important that kind of support and trust is to staff going forward.
I actually would kind of, to follow up a little bit on what you're saying, but also what Glenn was saying too. I mean, I think organizations need to also reward risk-taking.
Yes.
Even if it's a failure. You know, acknowledge that it happened. We're thrilled that you were bold. We just started something within just the last 4 or 5 months here at Philbrook where we've actually once a month we get together. Our staff is small enough, and so we all get together for an all-staff meeting. But we've started pausing in the course of that meeting to kind of identify some great things that have happened in terms of our framework or how we try and do business here. But we've also really encouraged people to highlight individuals, even if it's a failure. You know, kind of as a colleague of mine has said, you know, shots on the goal. You know, we're glad you took the shot. Even if it didn't actually score, we're so glad that you took the shot. And I think that encourages kind of ongoing innovation and the ability to kind of put yourself out there and take those risks.
Jane, would you like to expand a little bit on your comment about leaders needing to have the freedom to fail?
I would if you could hear me. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Indeed, we can.
Wow, okay. Yeah, because I think that actually we have to allow ourselves to try things, and sometimes I think that we're held back by that, by the feeling that we can't fail in front of people. In fact, I think that actually shows that we're all in doing and trying things together. So I think there's sometimes a feeling that the executive director always has to get it right, and I'm always amazed. I mean, I can tell stories about how wrong I was about things, and it was because we did prototyping that we realized that my notions, even though I thought I had been in the museum business a long time, how they were just completely off the mark. And I think that kind of levels the playing field, and everyone feels a lot more empowered to try things when they also see you trying ideas. So.
Could I throw in another kind of group that I would love to see us do an even better job of encouraging to take risks, and that's our visitors. I think maybe this is a particular problem for art museums, but I still think the prospect of confronting a big august institution or even an individual work of art is pretty daunting to a lot of art museum visitors. And the more we can empower them to trust their eyes and to trust their perceptions and to be frank about their skepticism and to ask questions and not feel that they have to come in with advanced degrees in art history in order to get anything out of the museum, it is enormously important to our credibility with them and to their feeling of owning and being a part of the organization.
I think that's a great point. Lynn Thompson asked a question about managing up and encouraging risk-taking on behalf of board or executive leaders. And that, I guess what she's suggesting here is that the staff are ready to take risks, but the leadership is not ready to take risks. And I think that that's not an uncommon situation, and we do hear that from a lot of people that we talk to who say, "What do I do if my leader, isn't able to lead in this way?" And we've certainly advised people at all levels of organizations to say, you can lead, you can begin to model this sort of behavior at the level at which you're at. Now, I think that in terms of encouraging and building trust in the leadership, that often comes through really good staff work. And that means that when you make a recommendation, it means you acknowledge the risk. It means that you develop mechanisms for managing the risk, and you communicate that really clearly to your leadership. I think that they often need to feel that that it is a managed risk, not just a foolish risk. I don't know if anybody else wants to speak to that, whether any of you have had to, I'm sure every single one of you has had to encourage your boards to take a risk. I mean, Jane, you helped parts of some members of your board and staff decide to stay in a neighborhood that some people thought wasn't a good place to stay. You had to articulate that in a way that helped people come to grips with the fact that that might be a really good risk to take.
Well, I think it always comes down to, what are you trying to accomplish and for who? So if you actually keep your eyes on the people that you want to impact, then the decision-making becomes pretty obvious. And the risk, I think people understand the risk at that point. So kind of keeping your eye on people, I think it makes things a lot more clear. It's kind of funny. If you simplify, it actually makes risk-taking and decision-making much more clear.
So I'm going to turn the conversation to the memorable mantra. Talk about trying to make things clear. Do they really work? Did you find that, coming up with a concise statement about what the vision was, what you were trying to get people to focus on, did it really work? And how did you come up with these little pithy statements? Ran, you're the king of the little pithy statement.
I think for my organization, they certainly have worked. And they're really based on storytelling, I think. They reflect where we were as an organization, but also from an aspirational standpoint, where we hope to go. And even this morning, I was talking with some people, and it's very clear that this has really become, they've all become a significant component of our story. And so for us, very quickly, it was, we're going to focus on what Philp does, not what it is. Exceptional does not equal essential. And then really the tagline of growth, inclusivity, and collaboration. And going back to just what you've said in the past, we do repeat those often. They are guidelines for us. They've become part of our vocabulary about how we refer to ourselves, to the work that we're doing, to the goals that we're embracing, and so forth. And I think what's important about those is that if they truly are backed up with conviction and resources and expectations, not only from the leadership down, so to speak, but throughout the organization, what ultimately happens is that you create a situation where you really can lead through others. In other words, that does create the latitude to be bold, as we were talking about. It encourages people to make those independent decisions and to challenge each other and to take risks, because at the end of the day, there is this shared vocabulary, there is this shared sense of what our values are, and the direction is already set. And I think over and above that, what's made them successful is that it also provides sort of collective conscience, which guides our investments and the kind of the development of our intellectual capital, and helps us get a sense of our progress throughout the time. And so from that standpoint, they do just become a very pragmatic and top-of-mind understanding of values. And I think that happens over and above your mission statement and your strategic plan. I'm not minimizing those in any way, shape, or form, but at the end of the day, these are the when you're really in the trenches and you're just doing work, these are oftentimes the things that kind of, again, jump to mind very quickly and guide your progress or your day.
Could I add, I love Rand's idea of the power of stories. We talk about that in many contexts, but it seems to me that a mantra only comes to true life when you can point to an illustration of it in practice through great work by a colleague or a situation where it really illustrates rather than saying what that mantra means.
Well, and I love what you just said about the shared vocabulary, because that's so much a part of this notion of shared vision, so that there's a consistent way that people talk about how that vision, materializes and comes to life.
Well, the other part of it is, I do think, as much as, I love the pithy, quotation or whatever, you can't really live your life by aphorisms. And so I think that the mantras have to be, the mantras really do have to be combined with some kind of a larger shared framework. Again, and I think that that's almost over and above your strategic plan or your mission. At Philbrook and in the book, we talk a little bit about the 5 Eyes of, we call them the 5 Eyes of organizational impact. And those provide that framework. And then, that gives people an opportunity to do all the things that we're talking about. There's, I hate to do this, and then I'll stop. Another great quotation, actually, by this designer named Bruce Mao, who lives up in Toronto. And I read in his article, I think it was back in the early 2000s in a New York Times Magazine article, he said, about his own work, it's a matter of understanding a vision and then using that vision to distribute possibility. And I think as leaders, again, at any level, if we can start focusing on that distribution of possibility, how do you create that ecosystem for people or for each other? I mean, that really then, when combining with whether it's these, those memorable mantras or your strategic plan and so forth, then I think real progress can be made within your organization.
And Rand, can you mentioned the 5 Eyes at Philbrook, and I just typed them into the chat box, and I wonder if you might spend a moment sharing a little bit about what these mean for you at your institution.
Well, again, they're really guideposts for us, but we focus on them, to different degrees at different times. But it's invention, which is really about creating new programs, new procedures, and so forth for your organization. There's innovation, which is different. Innovation for us is about ongoing improvement all the time. There's inspiration. We believe really that we have to be compelling in every single thing that we do. At the end of the day, all altruism aside, really probably within all of our respective communities, it's really just one pile of money. And we have to make sure that whether it's the next thank you note that we're writing or the next exhibition that we're doing or the next educational program that we're going to put on, that it has to be compelling and inspiring to people. Then integration is really about our mission throughout the entire course of the organization, as well as how do we as an institution integrate ourselves further into the various segments of our community and constituency. And then integrity, which is doing what we say we're going to do, when we say we're going to do it, and how we say we're going to do it, in addition to the sort of general notions of transparency and so forth.
Thanks, Rand.
So let's toss out another idea. We talked about the servant leader approach to leadership. How does that manifest at your museum? Does one of you want to share that process with us?
It's Bill. I'm thinking sometimes it's not even a process, but it's things that you simply do without thinking twice about it that seem to catch people's attention. I mean, we had a very big event not long ago, and there was a lot of time pressure to get it set up, and so a bunch of us in the senior leadership put on rubber gloves and went around the grounds and stuffed trash into plastic bags. And this caused a mild sensation that we would do that, which absolutely mystified us, because it seemed just the natural way that we all work together to get the job done. So sometimes it's quite unconscious when one becomes, I suppose, a servant leader.
Yeah, that manifests as a no job too big, no job too small kind of mentality, which you hope everyone in your organization might adopt. I also think that it plays itself out in really wanting to see people develop their talents and their skills. And Jane, one of the stories that I loved from the Children's Museum of Pittsburgh was the story of I'm sorry, I'm going to forget her name, but your person who runs your garden program, who had an interest in gardening, but had never done any garden design, and you all gave her the chance to make a proposal, and she did, and she raised the money, and then you said, now go dig it, now go do it. But you didn't throw her out there. You actually helped her. Can you tell a little bit more about that?
Sure. Her name is Kim Bracken, and she's one of those heroes that we all have in our institutions. And she actually I just saw her today this morning. She was handing a bag of lettuce to our chef in our cafe. She was saying, was it bitter yesterday? Because she knew I had the garden salad. So she's actually now growing the food, some of the food, for our cafe. It's right out in front. But she actually has done this amazing job of creating community gardens throughout the north side of Pittsburgh, where we're located, with teens. We actually hire teens every summer, and not only do we teach them about gardening and urban gardening, but we also teach them how to cook with it. And we're kind of in a very urban neighborhood. So this is it goes to the notion that if you teach kids 10 healthy recipes, they're kind of set for life. So she's just blossomed. I can't, no pun intended. She actually is just back from Ecuador, where she took 6 of our teens down to Ecuador, and 6 teens came back here from Ecuador through our Museums Connect program. So now she's actually learning about urban gardening in a different country. So she's making a big impact by just kind of starting. She just started. And we just gave her the area to do it, and you know, she's I can't say enough. She's one of those people that I would elect to public office if she ever ran. She just gets things.
Well, and I will speak to it because I interviewed Kim, and what Kim said to me was the fact that you and your deputy director, she said the fact that they trusted me to do this not only gave me the opportunity to do something great for the museum, but it really changed the trajectory of my life. And I think when we talk about servant leadership, it's not so much about getting people to do things because we need them to get the job done. We do things, we allow them and we help them to accomplish things because we want to see them develop to their full potential. And I think that came through so clearly in Kim's story, and also just frankly in listening to you tell about where that has developed even further, because Kim is now really in an act of empowerment with those young people in your community. And I think that's really where the power of all this comes together. As Bill talked a little bit about empowering your visitors, this is empowering your visitors. And I think it's just a tremendous act of unleashing human potential that starts just inside your museum and just with your own staff, but look where it leads.
Yeah, it's actually quite remarkable to even hear the kids talk. You know, the 6 kids who went to Ecuador, I think only one of them had ever been on a plane before. So they are just, their world has expanded beyond belief, and it's so much fun to talk to them. I mean, they just have all these different notions, and you know, when they were before they left, it's been pretty remarkable. And so she's plotting her next exciting adventure with the kids, and we just really can't wait to see what she comes up with next. But everybody's out there gardening. In fact, when I came walking in from lunch, we're out there digging in the garden already. So more to come, I think.
Would some of the other directors, would you be willing to share some stories about some of the ways in which your staff have felt empowered and the kinds of things that they have done on their own to realize the vision of the institution? You shared some wonderful stories with us. I'm wondering if you could do that with the larger group here today.
Well, hi, this is Glenn. Our most recent and I think most compelling example would be, I think it was featured a little bit in the book, Ron Settle, one of our curators, had an idea, and that idea was and we got a $100,000 grant. And he said, let me do something amazing with this money, things that, quite frankly, myself and others did not think he could accomplish. And he said, I want to do a full immersive theater where we write a storyline like a Broadway musical, but the stars are meerkats. And we're like, okay, yeah, right, you know. And 6 months later, it was built. He did it. Learned every bit of the technology, learned the systems, made a total sense around. The ceiling comes to life, the front, the walls. the characters, the floor, you name it, it happens. And we handed him $100,000, not really believing he could do it, and he did it. And I think that has spurred a lot of new growth and interest in other staff members saying, wow, we can do that too. So that's a great example at our institution.
And I think it's called Meerkat the Musical, right?
That's correct, yeah. Yeah, the Meerkat Musical.
I have to say, this is Anne. I have to say that I had the privilege of visiting the Science Center, and it is unbelievable. You cannot, I mean, it's really high tech. And, you know, what's Ron's background, Glenn?
He was a preacher.
He was a preacher.
He was, yeah.
There you go. Literally, it's surround sound. They built this incredible set that looks like it's a Broadway set. You know, it's high tech, and they even have these local musicians and singers. He wrote a musical, and you know he had them singing this incredible song, which you know I hum a few bars for you, but I'm a little off key. It was really great, and I'm so pleased to know that has spurred the rest of your staff thinking that they can do it too.
In wonderful ways, it really has.
This is Ellen. Can I tell a quick story?
Yeah.
This is actually not, our staff are always coming up with ideas, but this is actually about a volunteer group. We have a young professionals group, which we started about 4 or 5 years ago, and they were challenged to find ways to engage young professionals in the museum and allow them to have the same kind of experiences families and children have. And they were given no money, actually. And they came up with this idea, which our staff, staff struggled with, of opening the museum, the outdoors, the historic grounds, but having a brew tasting, a craft beer tasting, which they added historic elements to, and still had people filling out a password and experiencing the whole museum. And this is the third year. Last Friday was the third year it happened. The first year without advertising, just social media and word of mouth, we had 250 people. The second year, 500, and this year over 1,000, with no paid advertising. And I just feel like they got it. They got what we're about and did it by themselves, and have expanded their organization and really succeeded in bringing the community in. So I'm extremely proud of them and what they managed to do.
So I saw before that someone asked a question about how do you manage up and how do you engage, if you need to, senior leadership, or if you also need to engage your board. I'm particularly interested in hearing the directors talk about how you did bring your board along. I mean, Bill, you said they went screaming from the room when you first mentioned a new idea, a new approach for the mission and the vision of the institution. I'm wondering if others of you, dealt with similar things, and was there turnover on your board? Was there a lot of negotiation required? How did you go about that with your board?
Well, here in Greensboro, I can say we cheated a little bit. Basically, when the large master plan Science City USA was unveiled to the board, this is many years ago now, basically I sat there in shock because they said, thanks, but no. And said, okay, I'll go back and revise it. So, but in the meantime, we invited a world-famous zoo guy, Jack Hanna, to our facility, had a huge party, a big event, got him excited about the plan and the vision, and the event went extremely well, raised several $100,000, and all of a sudden the board members went, okay, I get this now, let's do it. So there are different ways to compel your board. Now, since then, it's been easy by comparison because everyone's bought into the vision and mission, but at first it can be challenging because people don't like change, I think, inherently, but excitement, time, a little bit of luck, and saturation of the ideas, I think it finally works.
Well, I think it's always, this is Jane, I think it's always interesting. I remember when I presented the big vision to the board, it was actually my first meeting as executive director. And I had already presented the vision to the executive committee. So when I turned up the light, half the board was sitting there nodding, and half the board looked like deer caught in headlights. Like, what the heck is she talking about? Like, we're going to take over the north side and make a children's cultural campus. But, you know, a little bit like Glenn, I had actually kind of gone around to all foundations in Pittsburgh and told them the idea kind of in a chit-chatty way, and had gotten their support. Not necessarily, they hadn't signed on the line, but at the same time I knew that there was some support for the idea. And frankly, there's nothing like a little expertise and a little money, and the board suddenly goes, oh, this could be a reality. This could happen. And I think just having just that little bit of support behind the vision really helps the board start to believe in it. So it is a little bit of a cheat because I kind of built up the support. As a friend of mine, Bill Strickland, who runs Manchester Craftsman's Guild, said to me when I got the job, he said, follow the money. And by actually having just a little bit of support behind it, I think that gave the board confidence.
This is Ellen, and I will tell you we had a completely different situation because Conner Prairie was not, I won't say owned, but was not independent until 2006. And at that point, the board that had been fired in 2003 came back, and they were so pleased to be finally an independent organization. Their risk tolerance was extremely high. It was like they had been waiting for years. So it was less convincing than just laying out the vision and telling them the results of marketing studies and funding studies for them to say, yeah, let's go with it. So a completely different experience.
Well, and I'm sure that no one else really wants to repeat the experience that you went through, where you were almost taken out of business by all that. But
very true.
Rand, you want to talk about the process at Philbrook?
Well, I mean, it was interesting for us. We actually dove into a pretty formal strategic planning process. And I think that process in combination with, there's nothing better than kind of getting some successes under your belt as an organization. And we had started to see that some of the changes we had made, even in the absence of a strategic plan, were working. That really encouraged our board members to do more. And I think that as we've been talking today, one of the things about risk is that it's so much more important to focus on the possibilities. That's why we all gamble, isn't it? Because there's a possibility that we're going to win big, and kind of staying focused on that vision, I mean, realistically, but still making it a stretch. I think our boards in particular, they don't necessarily always want to just know what's probable. I mean, when you're thinking big, you're doing strategic planning and so forth, I think as an organization we have a responsibility to kind of encourage them to think about what's possible. And so I think that was a lot of the conversations we had within our strategic plan. I can tell you right now, looking at our organization, and we're about to go into another round of strategic planning, and the last time around it was really about, okay, how do we change our organization? How do we change Philbrook? And now the big question that we're really posing to ourselves is, now that we've been at least modestly successful at changing Philbrook, the question is, how can Philbrook change our community? You know, how do we use the credibility that we've developed, the relationships that we've built? How do we use that to change our community? That's a big question for us. It sounds like it's a question that Jane has already answered with the Children's Museum in Pittsburgh, for example. But that's not a question that we've necessarily tackled. And I think that's the kind of aspirational, sort of dream-making possibility that really encourages board members to think broadly about the next stage of this organization. The other part of it that I would just quickly say is that I do think that there's something valuable about convincing boards that this is their moment, this is their time. You know, they have a legacy as well. In 25 or 30 years from now, they're going to be looking back at this group of people and saying, okay, what did you do during that time period? And kind of tying that in when possible to some element of civic pride. You know, we're going to create something that's going to be the envy of our peers, whether that's, you know, a sibling rivalry with a city across the state or a town across the river or whatever it is. I do think that oftentimes that ignites some passions that can be used to productive use.
And I think that sense of possibility is the thing that pulls people forward, right? That is what they align around, is the sense of possibility and the sense of excitement around that. And I believe that when they get attached to that sense of possibility, they can then communicate and enlist others in that vision. I see that Ellen's writing a little bit about Leading Change by John Cotter, which I mentioned earlier, and you know, he talks about establishing this guiding coalition. And what Cotter says is that the guiding coalition has to have 4 essential characteristics. First of these is position power. That means these are people who have the power to accelerate block progress within the organization. What he's talking about is when you're going to do organizational change, he's saying you have to understand who inside your organization can help be levers for others. Second thing is expertise, which is ensuring that various disciplines and points of view are fully represented so that you can make intelligent decisions. And the same thing happens on your board. You're looking for these same elements of position, power, and expertise. The third of these is credibility, because if you have a group of people who are trying to lead towards something who are not believable, then others are simply not going to follow them. And finally, he talks about the characteristic of leadership, which is including enough people in this guiding coalition who have a proven ability to take initiative and enlist others. Now, I think that whether we're talking about doing that first and foremost inside with your senior leadership team, or doing it with your board, those characteristics of leadership coalitions are absolutely critical, because if you've got somebody who can, if you leave somebody out of that leadership team who can block your progress, who can essentially make it impossible for you to do what you need to do, that's going to pull you off the tracks of this alignment that you're forging. So I just wanted to throw that in because I saw Ellen was referring to that as very critical in Conner Prairie's change, and I don't know if anybody else wants to speak to any of those.
Well, this is Greg. I heard Jane mention in her conversation about reaching out to community stakeholders, expertise and credibility as being powerful persuaders in helping get that to go along. Maybe you can talk a little bit more about that, Jane.
Yeah, I think that it's really important. We were a very small little children's museum, and we didn't really have any kind of track record. I mean, we had done a Mr. Rogers exhibit, which was incredibly well received, so we knew we could draw an audience. But as far as fundraising was concerned, we had very little track record, and we had very little track record of being in the community. We had done some outreach, but nothing like what we could imagine. So I think, we actually looked to people who were friends and who sometimes they were on the board, but sometimes they weren't, that really believed in us. And, we did things like we got a design grant from the National Endowment for the Arts. I was going to say for the AMPS, I don't know why. National Endowment for the Arts to do the design for our new building, which, having that level of design, when we went to raise money, it was terrific. I mean, we had the stamp of approval of the NEA and all of the design jurors that came in. So, you know, I think we looked at building relationships and friendships and expertise by actually engaging a lot of different people. And it's amazing when you ask people for help and just pick up the phone and call and say, I'm looking for advice. You learn a lot, you make new friends, and I think that gives your board, your staff, and even yourself a little bit of a feeling like, well, we can do this. We can actually all work together to make things better. So.
So I see that Greg has just put up this question to the audience, what's your museum's memorable mantra? Anybody got any good mantras they want to share in on the chat so we can talk a little bit more about those?
Well, you know, maybe it's a more nuanced way to ask the question would be, does your museum have a memorable mantra? And alternatively, if, you know, based on what we've been talking about today, if you were to craft one, what would it look like? What would that mantra be? And while we're waiting for folks to respond a bit, I'm wondering if any of our directors online, what advice might you share with our audience today that you wish you'd known before embarking on a new vision or new strategy for your institution?
It's Bill. I suppose I never cease to be surprised at how long things take that seem to, you know, run self-evident. So allow plenty of time for building the consensus and getting people bought in.
Ellen, anything you'd like to offer? Things you wish you'd known? Or
thank you. Well, a couple of things. The core of what Connerprix does, or what happened, was that we developed this new approach to interpretation called opening doors, which was really a sort of a Pixar approach to the museum, which is individualized attention and focus on visitors. And I wish I had realized that opening doors didn't just apply to the people coming in through the door, but that I should also be applying it to board members to engage and excite board members, to allow them to learn that lecturing doesn't work in whatever form. It just turns people off, that you have to involve, that you have to deeply engage them in whatever you're doing. Another area, which I'm actually just involved with right now, so I wish I had understood it, is understanding the existing frameworks people have in their minds, particularly because when we talk about on the staff drinking the Kool-Aid, it's understanding, we're asking if people really understand the different view of learning. I used to say, my mantra was a quote by William Butler Yeats, education is not filling a pail, but lighting a fire, and that's the core of what of what we do here, but I am now, and I think the staff all understand that and act on it, but I'm now sort of learning more and more about what the community hears and sometimes what our board members hear when you talk about the value of informal learning, that butts up against what they've always been told about education, and I wish I had known that I have to change the way I talk internally when I communicate externally, to not to work into existing frameworks instead of working against them, such as that education only happens in the classroom. It doesn't happen out of the classroom, that's just icing on a cake. And if our reason for being that we accept here is that we are recharging stations for adults and kids' interest and curiosity, that motivates us, but it may not translate to the outside public. So I wish I had known that too.
I love the idea of recharging stations. That sounds like its own memorable mantra. And speaking of that, I'm looking at a number of our colleagues in the audience who have shared with us their memorable mantras from their institutions, the Cleveland Museum of Art, for the benefit of all the people forever. Laura Gonzalez in Mexico, from the Museo Suamaya, Art for Everyone. Illinois State Museum System, Life, Land, People, and Art. I love the Brunswick Heritage Museum, all aboard. Let's see. Lynn Thompson at the Courier Museum, focused on art, centered on people. Carol in North Andover, your story starts here. It's really interesting. I like this. I'm interested by Sherry Newell's comment. We tried the following, but they didn't really catch on. Open optimism, mission-minded, courageous collaborations, adaptive accountability. I wonder if any of our directors online with us have any thoughts about maybe why that those selections might not have caught on.
My guess is that it's very hard for staff members to know what their role is in relation to that mantra. It's a good mantra, but if I were a staff member, I wouldn't know how to activate it.
I wonder if it's a bit abstract for a lot of us. Go back to the importance of what you do being infinitely more valuable than what you say, or having the two line up, of course. And what's actionable about those four wonderful pairs of ideas?
Well, I think that's exactly right, and we're talking about two things going on here. It seems in the chat where we have some things which are the way institutions are defining themselves externally, and some things which are the galvanizing concepts for the internal stakeholders of the institution. And I think that going through our own process here at the Cultural Data Project, which has been a pretty significant process of reinvention, for us it all stemmed from having a moment of insight where we said, we're a data collection initiative, and the insight for us was the fact that it was so broadly perceived as just an accountability tool, an accountability task, something that people just have to do in order to apply for a grant, that nobody thought about the fact that all of this information was actually a really powerful tool for learning and management. So our internal phrase is from task to tool. And for us, that embodies the change we're trying to make. It tells the staff whenever they're thinking about something, they're saying, how am I giving somebody a tool? Am I giving them a tool for learning and management? They really understand that that's the fundamental why of what we're doing, as opposed to we're just trying to collect data. And that's, I just found that phrase actually emerged from a conversation with one of our clients, who just said to me, it's just a task that the development officer gives me to do. And I said, why isn't it a tool for you? And he said, because I never thought about it that way. And out of that came from task to tool, and it just took root immediately because everybody got it. They could see what they needed to do to make it real, and they could begin to act towards it.
This is Rian Suffolk from Philbrook. I want to kind of go back to, I think what you've hit on something really important, which is that makes a lot of sense because you put it in the context of your story. And I think that it has to be part of, I kind of rattled off 3 things very quickly. But typically when we talk about them either internally or where they got their start and so forth, it really was because it reflected both who we had been, but also who we were striving to become. And I think that's really important. The other thing is, I think it's also significant to kind of pause and distinguish the difference between sort of the mantra of your DNA and a motto or a tagline, as I've seen it called in the chat. I think there's something very different between those two. And so for whatever it's worth, again, it's not just a memorable mantra, but like I said, what's really the mantra of your DNA as an organization? Because if you start talking in those terms, I think it really gets to who you are and who you aspire to be.
Well, this is Greg.
It's the rallying cry. It's the rallying cry around which that alignment emerges. Sorry, go ahead.
That's right. No, I was just going to say that my colleague Cecilia Walls down the hall here at AAM posted in the chat box that our memorable mantra here at AAM is Champion Museums Nurture Excellence. And many of you know that we went through a very significant organizational change and rebranding a couple of years ago. And so that mantra serves as a very nice logo or a branding tool. But it actually really is, as Beth, you described, it is a tool towards everything that we aspire to be. That our goal is to champion museums and to nurture excellence. And for us, excellence can mean everything from helping our museum colleagues be the best they can be in whatever jobs they do in, with, and for museums, or to champion excellence institutionally through our accreditation programs or museum assessment programs. So it really is part of our organizational DNA and also a nice tagline for our organization.
When you
and I think, go ahead.
When you started this discussion with the bullseye, you started with a why in the center, and I think of that is for the staff, telling them, really having them understand why we matter. And it's not just what we do on site, but why we matter to the community, why we matter to the people that come here in a broader sense. And we talk about here nurturing the next generation, a generation of curious kids that become lifelong learners who embrace learning. That's what we call our change the world view. And I think staff members and board members really need to feel like they are associated with a higher cause and understand specifically what role each one of them plays in making that happen.
I'd also add that I just think it's absolutely critical that as leaders, we have to be crystal clear about our own motivations and our own passions, because the authenticity of what we believe and what is motivating us is first and foremost the driver for that vision. Others may come to share that vision. Others may help you shape your vision, but if it's not authentic to you, it's a very difficult place to stand as a leader trying to enact a vision that is not authentic to you. And so I think getting at that question of what's the why for you yourself is a very fundamental first step in this journey.
I agree.
Clay Christensen, who Ellen referenced earlier, who's a professor at the Harvard Business School, has done a lot of work in that realm, and he's really looked at, he's written an article called How Will You Measure Your Life? And it speaks to exactly what you just said, that it is about a sense of personal purpose that translates into the public realm. And I recommend his reading to anybody that's on our call today. He's quite an inspiring man.
Well, it's interesting because I don't think it's just the leader that actually is purpose-driven, right? I mean, I think that it has to be that everyone has to feel like they're making a difference in the world, that they're leading a fruitful life, and I think then that's actually when good things happen. So, from the board to the staff, I think everybody has to have a very authentic feeling about the work that they do. I don't know, just think that that's important to having everybody move the institution forward.
And I have staff.
On point. Go ahead, Ellen.
Oh, I have staff tell me all the time, I spent years, or 10 years in the classroom, and I see my role in a similar way here, or trying to engage children, but I feel like I have much more of an impact and am much more fulfilled in the role I have now.
Well, as we near the end of our time together, I want to take a moment to thank Anne and Beth, not only for writing the book on which this program is based and doing all the research that went with it. And of course, thank you for spending your time so thoughtfully today. And of course, to our colleagues who joined us today, Ellen and Jane, Bill, Rand, and Glenn, we really appreciate you. This program is sponsored by the Getty Foundation and brought to us by Learning Times in collaboration with our Leadership and Management Professional Network. And if you have not yet registered for the next two webinars in this series, I encourage you to do so. Simply go to our website, click on the Resources tab, and go to Online Programs, and you'll be able to register for each of those programs. Adam, I see that you just pulled up the evaluation pod in the upper left-hand corner of the screen. I would love it if everyone in the audience took a moment to click on that evaluation link and give us your feedback. It's very important for us as we work on planning future programs. And if you have not had a chance to get a copy of Magnetic, the Art and Science of Engagement, I do encourage you to do so, again, by going to our website and clicking on the Resources tab and the bookstore. With that said, my name is Greg Stevens, Assistant Director for Professional Development here at the American Alliance of Museums. Thank you all for joining us today. We'll see you next time for part 3 of our Magnetic webcast series.